Well, it's wonderful to be here with you and to share with you. I haven't even been able to listen in on the Wednesday nights as we've been having our launch team meetings, but I have listened afterwards to a couple of the talks and have been blessed by them. And so it's great to actually get to share with you tonight and to be here. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about myself to begin with. As Kathy said, I'm married to Dave and we've just launched our church plant in Officer, which is in the southeast growth corridor of Melbourne. And although this is actually our first gig as for Dave as a Presbyterian minister, so although he actually finished his training as a Presi minister in Sydney 25 years ago, so we've spent the last 24 years doing student ministry, mostly with the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students, but also for 2 years as a chaplain at the Scots School in Bathurst. So we have spent 12 years in Bathurst, and then we spent 12 years in Geelong, where we moved from to come to Officer. And before that, we both worked out we'd spent 12 years in Sydney. So perhaps we're 12-year people. So it was in Sydney that we met, having both grown up in country New South Wales. In my 30 years of being married to Dave, it's been often been an adventure in hospitality. Even though I've been doing hospitality in some capacity for most of my adult life, I've actually found that as I've prepared for this teaching tonight, that God's been doing some major surgery in my heart. I've had to change some of how I think about hospitality, and maybe you too will need to change some of what you think as we work through this together tonight. I certainly do hope that you're ready to be challenged. So let's go. We're going to start with thinking about why we can be hospitable, and it's of course because God is hospitable, because of his amazing hospitality to us. So we're going to think about that first, God's hospitality. And the best place to start is with creation. God made this amazing world, and he made us, and he gave us the world to enjoy, to live in, to rule over, and to care for. So let's read together Genesis chapter 1, verses 28 to 30. It's going to come up on the screen.
God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I will give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the sky and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so.
So you may have noticed that right up here at the start of the Bible, food's actually mentioned twice. We and all the animals are created with this need for food and then provided for wonderfully by God. But God provides more than that, doesn't he? It's so much more than just food. He made this beautiful world for us where we could be who we were meant to be, live in perfect harmony with him, with each other, and with the created world. What a welcome. What a perfect expression of hospitality. What more could we want? But then, as we all know so very well, we stuffed it up really quickly. We wanted to choose for ourselves what was right and wrong, turned our backs on God and on his amazing provision for us. Amazingly though, God didn't turn his back on us. He didn't give up on us. He made a way back, first for Israel and then through Israel for everyone. More astonishing hospitality. So let's have a think about Abraham. God called Abraham to leave his father's household and his land and to go to a land far away that he didn't know and where he didn't belong. God promised to give Abraham's descendants this land that he would show him and to bless him and through him to bless all people. So let's zoom into the moment when Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son, his only son of the promise, his son through his wife Sarah. Abraham's gone to a mountain in the area of Moriah to do as Yahweh has commanded him. But then Isaac asks, "Where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" So we read in Genesis 22, verse 8.
Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And then two of them went on together.
And a little while later, after God has rescued Isaac from his father's knife, we read in 22, verses 13 to 14.
Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided."
So God demanded sacrifice for the atonement of sin, but then he provided the very sacrifice himself. If we think about the wilderness, after God rescues his people from slavery in Egypt, he didn't just leave them to their own devices. I suspect they wouldn't have lasted very long, even though at times they seemed to fear that he had left them. They grumbled constantly. "Oh, we were better off in Egypt around our pots of meat. Why did you have to bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Lots of grumbling, but God provided for all their needs. He rescued them from their enemies, and he sent bread and meat and water. And in all the time they ended up having to spend in the wilderness as they learnt how to trust their God, their clothes and their sandals didn't wear out, and their daily needs for bread and for water and for meat and for protection were continually met by their faithful and gracious and forgiving God. So the hospitality of God is written large in the unfolding story of God's dealing with his people, but we're just doing a flyover, so let's zoom forward to Jesus. So this area of Moriah, where Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, is actually where Jerusalem came to be built. And it was here that God provided the ultimate sacrifice that ended all sacrifices. Jesus Christ, his own dear son, died a criminal's death that we could be forgiven and have relationship with God again. And this is the price he paid to make a way back for us. God invites us in, and not just into a land or into a tabernacle or even into the temple, but into his very family. God invites us into his family. At great cost to himself, he makes a way for us to be welcome in his sight, to be called his children. What great love, welcoming the enemy, dying for the enemy. This is amazing. This is God's hospitality. And as we read through the Gospels, especially if we read through them with the idea of hospitality in mind, we're actually blown away by Jesus' hospitality, the things he does, the stories he tells, the conversations he has, regularly teach us more and more about hospitality. And I want to give you a challenge. After tonight, take some time to read through a Gospel and look for what it's teaching us about hospitality. In Luke, you'll find Jesus constantly eating with sinners. And in the other Gospels, I'm sure we'll find other things to delight in. And here's an even bigger challenge. Read them all through with this in mind. I'm sure it will be very rewarding and very challenging experience as we think about hospitality. And as I'm challenging you, I'm actually challenging myself, because I wanted to do this in preparation for tonight, but I didn't actually get very far. I haven't finished. I chose to start with John because I just love listening to Jesus' voice. So much of Jesus' voice in John's Gospel, but I didn't even manage to finish John's Gospel. But let's go to Luke chapter 15, the parable of the lost son and the loving father. Here, the hospitality of God is explained through family relationships. We see an ungrateful, wayward son who thankfully comes to his senses and returns home. We see a gracious, loving, forgiving father who stands waiting for this wayward son to return. He doesn't stop his son leaving. He doesn't go and try and drag him out of the mud. He waits patiently and hopefully for his son to return. He doesn't force him. And when he does return, what rejoicing is there? A banquet is given. The fatted calf is killed. A celebration is essential to the father. And we see, of course, the older brother. He doesn't want to join the celebration, doesn't understand his father's attitude. The older brother just can't find it in himself to welcome his own brother home. Well, in this parable that I'm sure you're very familiar with, it's clear that the Father is God. Jesus is teaching us about God, what he's like and how he relates to us, what he wants for us and how he welcomes us in. And my sisters, this is an amazing expression of hospitality. I'd like to say God is the ultimate hospitalian. There's a new word I've made up for you. And note this, it's an invitation, it's not forced. Hospitality is never forced, not in the garden, not in this parable, and not now. But the questions this parable asks us are, who are we? Are we the wayward son? Have we come to our senses? Or are we still wallowing in the mud with the pigs? Are we the older brother? Would we welcome home our wayward brother? Do we delight in God's hospitality or do we reject it? Do we want to extend it to others or keep it to ourselves, as the older brother just doesn't seem to understand, doesn't get it? So family is a great picture of hospitality. If we say when we've been welcomed somewhere that we've been treated like family, we're saying that we've been treated really well, aren't we? We're saying that we couldn't have asked for any more. We're saying we feel loved. On the flip side, this is why when families don't work, it's so tragic and so damaging. In his book, Evangelism in a Skeptical World, Sam Chan explains why he thinks the family meal in a Christian home is one of the most powerful proclamations of the gospel. He says this: "We see the gospel at work as a family eats together in peace, acknowledging God as Lord, Creator and Provider. We can easily underestimate how unusual and attractive it is for those who don't know Jesus to see a functioning family in action, especially around the dinner table." You might be tempted to think that's never going to be your family, that they're not functioning well around the dinner table, but it can be a wonderful expression of the gospel. Now, in the gospel, where we are at the moment, there's so many other examples of Jesus showing hospitality, and you'll find your own if you take up the challenge to read through one. There's, of course, the wedding at Cana that comes to mind, where Jesus extends the party and rescues the host by making lots of quality wine. There's the woman at the well, who Jesus talks to despite all the cultural taboos that says he shouldn't talk to her. He answers all her questions, and she, in turn, is amazed and brings the rest of her village along to hear him. We see Jesus inviting himself to Zacchaeus' house. I love this one. Zacchaeus is trying just to see Jesus, just to get a glimpse of him, and being kind of blocked out. And so when Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house, Zacchaeus is thrilled to bits to have him, goes home, welcomes him into his home, and then turns his life around on the spot. And there's, of course, the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000. The list could go on. These are just a few examples. And you'll see many more if you do read through it. And there's more examples, of course, of hospitality and teaching about hospitality throughout the Acts of the Apostles and in the letters as well. But let's keep going to eternity. Because of all that God has done for us, we can now look forward to enjoying the perfect peace in the garden again, and this time forever. We will have come full circle. We'll be back to the joy and perfection that there was in the garden. Oh, how I look forward to this, to being welcomed by God into our heavenly home, to enjoy him forever with no more sin and no more consequences of sin. What a joy that will be. So, why can we be hospitable? It's because of God's hospitality to us. He made us and he redeemed us, and all we have is from him. So I'm saying we can be hospitable because God is. So then, it begs the question, doesn't it? Why doesn't hospitality come easily? Why do we find it so hard? Well, by ourselves, we don't want to be hospitable. We could never come close to God's hospitality. We are poor and weak. We're sinful and flawed. We're selfish and unwelcoming. We don't even really want to be hospitable. We want to hang on for ourselves all that we have. Our time, our things, our food, our drink, our space. But God's Spirit can and does work in us to conform us to the likeness of his Son. Hospitality is always going to be God's work in us and through us. We can't do it alone, and we won't. So as we seek to be hospitable, to model our hospitality on the hospitality of God, to point others to our loving Heavenly Father, we must depend on his strength, on his wisdom, on his guidance and his inspiration, and on his generosity to us. I'm sure many of you have heard the modern phrase, paying it forward, used in different ways. And I think that's a phrase that actually works here, paying it forward. All we have is from God, and he needs nothing from us. We can't actually give back to God, so we give to others as we can. Out of the riches God has lavished on us, we seek to bless others. This has to be our motivation. So this is probably a good place to stop and have a go at actually defining hospitality. How would you define hospitality? What ideas would you include? I've gone with hospitality is inviting people into your life and being willing to enter into theirs. Now, you may be surprised that I don't have your home in there or food. Now, I do think your home and food can be a very important part of how you do hospitality, but it's not essential. In this world, Jesus didn't have a home. And if you stopped at that first half, inviting people into your life, I think there's always a danger that it could just be entertainment. If you're just inviting people into your home, maybe you're just showing them your stuff and entertaining them. The other thing I want to say is, as well as it being inviting people into your life and being willing to enter into theirs, I also mean in a physical sense. So in this modern world, there's lots of other options. So I don't mean through electronic media. This is less real. This is where you can just show the parts of yourself that you want others to see. Life is messy. Mine is, yours is, theirs is. You can pretend otherwise on Facebook, as I'm sure you know, and Instagram and Snapchat and all the other things out there. But we can't actually wait for our life to be like our Facebook feed. We can't wait to be all sorted out before we do hospitality, because we're not going to be all sorted out this side of heaven, are we? And yet we're called to be hospitable this side of heaven. So that's my definition that I'm going with. Inviting people into your life and being willing to enter into theirs. Because this is what God did. He made this world and he invited us in to enjoy it. And then he invited us back after we rejected him. And he keeps inviting us in. He entered our world. He came as the Son. He came and lived with us, or tabernacled with us, pitched his tent among us, so that we could be invited back. He stands at the door and knocks is another picture of him coming to us. So I don't think hospitality can be limited to inviting people into your home or accepting an invitation into theirs. It's inviting people into your very life, into the mess, and entering into theirs. But keep thinking and talking with each other. I really do want to challenge you not to just listen to me, but to listen to Jesus, to listen to his word, and to keep thinking about how you would define it for yourself. We're going to think now about why we must be hospitable. Firstly, we're going to look closely at a couple of New Testament passages. The first one doesn't actually use the word hospitality, but I do think it teaches us about hospitality. So we're going to read from 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 to 11.
His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to the goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For you possess these qualities in increasing measure. They will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But whoever does not have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their past sins. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, make every effort to confirm your calling and election. For if you do these things, you will never stumble, and you will receive a rich welcome into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ.
Don't you love that last verse? You will receive a rich welcome into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ. Peter wants us to keep our eyes on the prize, to keep our eyes on this prize. This is what it's all about. This is why we persevere in the Christian life. We look forward to God's final act of hospitality towards us, the rich welcome we will receive. This is the finish line, and that's what we need to keep our eyes focused on. If we get distracted and think that something else will do as a finish line, we might not make it to the real finish line. If we get tempted to think the perfect house or the best job or the perfect family or the most amazing holiday or the latest technology or the most sought-after award, if we think it's something like that, we'll sell ourselves so very short. God's given us all that we need so that we can escape the corruption in this world and not be sucked in by those sorts of things, so that we can make it to the finish line, to the rich welcome into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Saviour. I want to tell you a story I found. On a foggy July morning in 1952, a young woman named Florence Chadwick set out to swim from Catalina Island to the coast of California. Now, this is a distance of just over 30 kilometres. So this is an island just off the coast of California. I'd never heard of it, but there it is. Now, she wasn't new to long-distance swimming. She had actually been the first woman to swim the English Channel, and she swam it in both directions. I'm not sure if she swam it in both directions at the same time, but she swam it in both directions. Anyway, this morning in July in 1952, the water was cold, the fog was thick, and several times sharks came and had to be driven away with rifle fire. Florence could hardly see the boats in her support party, and she swam for 15 hours and then asked to be taken out of the water. Her coach begged her to keep going. You're nearly there, just keep going. But when Florence looked around, she couldn't see anything. All she could see was the fog. And so she asked again to be taken out of the water. She gave up. She was 800 metres from her goal. Later, she explained. She said, "I'm not excusing myself, but if I could have seen the end, if I could have seen the goal, if I could have seen the land, I might have made it." It wasn't the cold or the sharks or exhaustion that caused Florence to fail that day. It was the fog that was blocking her view of her goal. 2 months later, on a clear day, she swam all the way. It's so encouraging to be able to see the finish line. When she could see the finish line, she made it. And we have this promise that we will receive a rich welcome. That's what we have to look forward to. If we what? If we keep doing these things. And I think hospitality is a big part of doing these things as we look forward to our rich welcome in heaven. We need to continue offering a rich welcome to our neighbours here on earth. And we can keep adding these qualities. Peter wants us to add to faith goodness. So faith is trusting in God's promises that he will supply all we need, even if we do share it with others as we be hospitable. He wants us to add goodness, to keep on being good, to keep on welcoming people into our lives and entering into theirs. He wants us to add knowledge, understanding more and more about what the Bible teaches about God and how he wants us to live, the promises he's made to us. He wants us to add self-control and perseverance, to keep opening our lives to others, not to give up if it gets challenging or if it's hard, if you have a tough time. Keep going in God's strength. He wants us to add godliness, brotherly kindness and love, and mutual affection or brotherly kindness and love. That's quintessentially hospitality, isn't it? That's how we can love, and one of the ways we can love and care for each other is to be hospitable. And he wants us to possess all these qualities in increasing measure so that we won't be ineffective. It's interesting to note that we can be ineffective in our knowledge, but Peter wants us not to be. God can and does use us if we open our hearts and our lives to others if we invite them in and enter into their lives. Remember, we have all that we need for a godly life through our knowledge of God. So knowing things is important, but it's not enough. We have to act on our knowledge. It's interesting, that phrase too, all that we need, right at the start of that passage, that God has given us all that we need for a godly life. I find that quite a challenging phrase. Can we ever really say that we have all that we need? It all seems to be something else that you want, something that we think we need. Can we truly believe this promise? That we haven't missed out on something, that God hasn't duped us somehow? We have to really work hard to trust this, that we have all that we need. And there's something even more amazing in this passage, I think, where it says that we get to participate in the divine nature. We get to be like God. God's Spirit's working in us to transform us to be more like Him so that we can be hospitable. We must be hospitable. God is, and so we can be as we seek to be like Him. And as we welcome people in, they get an opportunity to hear about this same rich welcome that we're looking forward to. And we can offer that rich welcome to them. So I find that passage very encouraging as we think about hospitality. But let's look at another one that actually does mention hospitality. And it's Paul's letter to Titus, chapter 1, and we're going to read verses 7 to 9.
Since an overseer manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it.
So in this passage, Paul's actually instructing Titus about appointing elders on Crete, where he's left him to sort out what was left unfinished. And he's telling them that they must be blameless. And I think we can apply these instructions to ourselves as we're trying to live as God wants us to. God calls us all to be blameless. So here, blameless is like a heading, and then Paul spells out what it's not. So it's not overbearing, it's not quick-tempered, it's not given to drunkenness, it's not violent, and it's not pursuing dishonest gain. Then he contrasts it with what it is, what blameless is. And the list starts, interestingly, I think, with hospitality. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy and disciplined. So let's start with what hospitality is contrasted with. It's not overbearing, or what the elder is called not to be overbearing or quick-tempered or drunk or violent or pursuing dishonest gain. And I think hospitality is clearly none of those things. We need to invite people in and let them be themselves and not be overbearing and try and make them like us or make them do things the way we want them to do them or to be like us. We must work hard at not being quick-tempered, but rather be patient and loving, not getting annoyed at the things that they do as we invite them in. Their ways might be quite different to us, and that might be a challenge to us. And as we invite people in, we certainly can't be given to drunkenness or even excess in any other form. Too much to drink, too much to eat, too much entertainment, too much social media. There could be other things. And of course, we mustn't be violent, but gentle and gracious, and not be seeking dishonest gain, not be even concerned with the cost that hospitality might be. Rather, we must love what is good and be self-controlled, upright, holy and disciplined. Hospitality is so much all of these things. It is good to do hospitality, and it does take self-control and holiness and discipline. I want to say that hospitality is actually good for us because it's good for our godliness. It's godly to do, but I want to say that doing it actually helps us be godly. Being hospitable can show up our sin and our selfishness. It's harder to convince ourselves how good we are when we have other people in our house testing our patience, or in our lives testing our patience. Hospitality helps us learn self-control and discipline. It gives us opportunity to express our love and kindness and patience and generosity to others. Remember when Jesus talked about giving a banquet? When you give a banquet, don't invite those who can invite you back. Invite those who can't. So generosity is a big part of it. I want to think too, though, about how hospitality is more than what we do. It's actually how we make people feel, which is, of course, linked to what we do. But if we think about this dimension, we can see that just going through the motions and just doing stuff is not enough. People will be able to see through our bad attitude. We need to genuinely love people, genuinely care that they are comfortable and that their real needs are met. So we're going to think a bit more about our attitude. What does the Bible have to say about this? Well, the first verse that's quite challenging is Philippians chapter 2, verse 14, which says, "Do everything without grumbling or arguing." Well, that's a bit of a kicker, isn't it? Can we even go a whole day without grumbling, or even an hour? And even if we don't grumble out loud, we're kind of grumbling under our breath. I'm certainly good at this. Grumbling in our hearts, playing the martyr, going, "Why is my day so hard? Why do I have to put up with this, God?" And we actually see this same command specifically about hospitality. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, it says, "Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling." Now, why would we grumble? We have a place to invite people to, we have food to eat. What is there to grumble about? Well, for me, it can be the dirty floor, the lack of help with cleaning up, the things not put in the dishwasher, the things not put in the dishwasher the right way, the toys not picked up perfectly, the cups and glasses, sometimes found in weird places 3 days later. There's all sorts of things that I can grumble about, and I'm sure you have your own. Having church in our house has actually been a real challenge to me. And even as I was preparing for this teaching session tonight, I hit the end. I realised on the Sunday where we had our practice launch, which was 2 Sundays before our real launch, that what we were doing was unsustainable for me. It took me a day before I told Dave that I just wasn't coping. But I did get brave and tell Dave. So we talked about it, we worked out some things, and we worked out that we had to talk to the team. So we explained to them that I needed them to be more proactive in cleaning up. And also, I needed them, this might sound strange, but I needed them to think of the house more as the church and less as my house. Because while ever they were thinking of it as my house, they were asking me everything and asking me where the trays were and could I find them a Band-Aid, and this was getting all too much for me. I admitted to them that I was a big part of the problem, and I invited them to call me out on that because my problem is I'm a bit particular about things. So they were asking me because they thought that's what they needed to do. They were trying to be helpful and loving. So I acknowledged that I was part of the problem and asked them to tell me when they saw that in me. I told them I would welcome their loving rebuke, and I hope I can pull that off. But I did encourage them to do that. So after we talked, I felt so much better that they understood. They couldn't read my mind. And also they were so much better. The cleaning up the next few weeks was awesome, and the launch service went so well, and the team worked really well. And it wasn't just because of what I'd said. They're a great team. But we're still going to have challenges. I know I'm still going to have challenges, but we'll keep working through it together and keep being honest and loving with each other. And I want to have a word to those of you who are listening who are actually married to someone in ministry or even in ministry yourself. Do be prepared to share the load. Let others in church know when you're struggling. Work out who you can trust with this, because hospitality can be hard. It's good for them to know you need help, for them not to sit back and think, "Oh, she's got it all sorted, isn't she amazing?" and you be quietly drowning. Let them know how you're going. Don't be proud or stoic, but share the load. Remember that that's what Jesus tells us, to carry one another's burdens. Because it's your job or your husband's job, sometimes you may not even be able to say no when you want to or need to, but your attitude is always a choice. Our attitude is always a choice. Tell someone your struggle, allow them to minister to you, and allow them to help if they are willing. Instead of grumbling and complaining, seek help. And in your church, seek to care for those who are ministering to you, who might be carrying a bigger load. All of us can be a huge blessing to each other. Ask how each other's going. Or here's an even more confronting question. Well, not even confronting, but an interesting question. Ask each other what you're struggling with as you do this together. It's a pretty safe bet, especially perhaps for your minister's wife, that there'll be something that she'll be struggling with. Pray with and for her. And if you can help in a practical way, do. We recently hosted the PYV bonfire, and that too was a big challenge for me. In our new church plant, we actually get to live on 10 acres that the church bought 12 or so years ago. And the house we live in is on that 10 acres, and we have a shed and we have lots of space. I don't know if you know how big 10 acres is, but it's plenty of space. Now, the youth that came that night, 120 of them, were not good at avoiding walking in the mud. It had been quite wet, and it was rather dark. They were hopeless at dealing with their trash. The recycling was all mixed up with the rubbish, that was all mixed up with food scraps, which at my place is always chook food because I have chooks. But you know what? They had a lot of fun. They listened attentively to Dave's talk, and they enjoyed the space and the fire and each other. Thankfully, God actually worked in my heart that night and helped me see the positive. And I was really thankful to be living in a place where we could have a bonfire and host 120 youth. I grew up on a farm, so I just love all that stuff, and I love having a fire. I must admit, though, that the thankfulness was interspersed with moments of struggle with how long it took to return the house and the property to some sort of order afterwards. So I've still got a lot of work to do to learn to offer hospitality without grumbling. Hospitality is costly. We've got to learn to trust God with that cost and keep depending on Him for all our needs. But we're called to share what we have, to use what we have, whatever it is. God won't actually ask us to share anything more than that. He won't ask us to share what we don't have, but He doesn't ask for any less either. So how do we use what we have? I asked my son and his wife this because they live in a tiny unit in Oakley, and I asked them, how do you do hospitality? It's a squeeze when just Dave and I go and visit. So they realised that their best option was to only have 2, at the most 3 guests, but they do this often. So this works in their young church, where there's no family of more than 3, and when there are 3, it's usually quite a young baby. And they have many single people in their church. So they invite people over after their 4:30 church service for dinner most Sunday nights, and they prepare for that by having a meal bubbling away in the slow cooker, ready for when they get home. They also join bigger groups sometimes that might go out for dinner after church. They try to use what they have to fit hospitality around their circumstances. And I think we can all do that. We've been blessed with large houses often. And so I'll tell you some of the stuff that we've been able to do. When we first moved to Bathurst, that was our first job as working in student ministry. We rented a rather large house, which was great for hospitality. Dave had his office in the garage, and we rented out the main bedroom to a student. And that just helped us afford it. That wasn't really hospitality because there was money involved. But we did invite the student into our lives, and they generally enjoyed that. When we got to build a house in Bathurst, we continued to rent out a room, and for a little while we actually rented out 2. And our kids just loved it. Our kids loved the girls that stayed with us. They would read to them and play with them and occasionally babysit them. It was a lot of fun, good for us and good for them. One of my sons managed to get someone, one of our boarders, to read through the whole Narnia series to him. She was a legend. We actually had to stop having students in our house when we were expecting our 3rd child. We thought that we'd probably fill the house up ourselves then. But we'd built this house on half an acre, In Bathurst you can do that. So we had chooks and veggies and fruit trees and a great area for cricket and for soccer. We had our church's ladies' Bible study there, which worked really well. We had 2 groups meeting. We'd kick Dave out of his office and have one group in there and one group in the lounge room, and the kids would be in the family room and outside, and I would be able to often get a couple of students to come and look after them for us. So that was a lot of fun and worked really well. In our last 2 years in Bathurst, Dave was actually the chaplain at the Scott School, and this involved moving out of our house and moving onto the campus, into a residence on the school campus. The house was adequate, but much smaller and with no large living space, and 2 of our sons had to share a room, which was a bit of a challenge for them. But we had outside, and outside was awesome. We were allowed to invite friends during school holidays to the pool. We were allowed to use the pool. So we had our own pool, and we were also allowed to use the oval. We had a really shady backyard, which was rubbish for growing vegetables, but great for barbecues. And we even had paddocks that we could use. So we could play cricket in the paddock, and we even raised 2 potty lambs, so my kids could experience something I'd experienced as a kid. I remember too, for one colder or wetter birthday party, we were able to use the school gym and the boys played indoor soccer. In winter, one of the things we did as a way to cope with the smaller space was to invite smaller year groups of boy boarders, I think there were only boy boarders, is why we did it that way, over for dessert and footy watching. One lad, I think it was his 2nd or maybe his 3rd visit, he turned to Dave with a really puzzled expression on his face and said, "Sir, do you like having people in your house?" He was just a little bit bamboozled by this constant hospitality that Dave did and that he'd been invited back. But you know what? I'm pretty sure that Dave had a better audience in those kids when he was preaching at chapel, because they'd been in his house and eaten his food and spent time with his family. Then we moved to Geelong, and the house we bought in Geelong was similar to the one we built in Bathurst. We were very blessed that we were able to afford this one with the large living areas. Dave fell in love with it as soon as he saw it. He says, "Oh, look at this, Jan, look what we could do in here." And I'm going, "We can't afford it, why are we looking at this house?" But by God's grace, we could. It had a great outdoor space too for barbecues and welcoming people. And we hosted all sorts of things, farewells and parties and street parties and kids' things and breakfasts and welcome barbecues. A lot of this is for students. And games nights, and there were, of course, cricket games. You might have worked out by now that I quite like cricket. And now we get to live on 10 acres, as I've mentioned. What a joy for both of us who got to grow up on farms. Our church plans to start a community garden. We've built a playground together. We hosted the PYV bonfire, and we've just more recently hosted our previous church's youth camp, which was a lot of fun. Here they are, enjoying our calves. So I've got 2 baby calves to help eat the grass. Oh, and there's me too. I asked Dave to leave that one out, but my husband did the slides because I can't do them. So at this point, the 2 little calves were a little bit ill, which can happen when they're very young, and the whole church went over there and are trying to feed them and love them, and they had a lovely time. So you get a picture of our place and some of the space. And it's been such a delight for us to use all this space to welcome people. Our church kids love the calves and they love the chooks. Keeping them out of the chook yard sometimes a bit of a challenge. But for us, in this new place, the house is a bit of a challenge for us. The kitchen's much smaller than what we're used to, which makes serving morning tea as well as preparing dinner when we have the team around a bit of a challenge. But we're working it out together, as I've mentioned, and we're trying to work out how to make it sustainable for all of us. So clearly, a big part of inviting people into our lives is inviting them into our home. And it's where you feel most comfortable and where you are most real, and where we're less likely to be putting on an act. It's where our stuff is, where the evidence of just who we are and how we live is, what level of tidiness we live with, and what sort of cleaners we are, and what sort of things we display. I'm wondering if you've ever been to visit someone, been to their house, knocked on the door, had it answered, and yet not been invited in. And I don't mean door knocking, because of course that's different. I mean someone you know. There are, of course, good reasons for not inviting people in. I've done it myself. But it should never be our habit to keep people out. I had a neighbour in Geelong. We had some rather negative experiences of our family when we first moved into our court. One of my sons would stand up on the camper and survey her backyard, and two of them would clamber over the fence when a ball went over to retrieve the ball and damage her plants, sometimes quite valuable plants because she really liked conifers. And they're just the things I know about because they're the things she came and told me about. So she got rather upset with us. She came and told me several times different things that he did. So I set myself this task of winning her over. I went, right, I'm going to keep being friendly and I'm going to win this lady over. So I'd be friendly when I saw her at the mailbox, and I started mowing her nature strip when I mowed mine. We moved the court Christmas party into our place. We thought that would be more comfortable, and she usually came along. And she did thaw out, and she was friendly in return to us. She even left me gifts sometimes when I mowed her nature strip and her very small front lawn. I got to know her dog, or I tried to get to know her dog, and I got to know its name, and I got to even know the name of her dog walker. And she started mowing my nature strip when she mowed the front. And by the time we left, she was paying someone to mow her nature strip, and she had clearly told them to mow mine as well. So I got a bit of a free ride there at the end, and I think our tenants are getting the same free ride. I used to go over and let her know when we were going away or when we were having a loud teenage birthday party. But you know what? In 12 years of living next door to this lady, I never once got past the front door. I was never once invited into her house. That was the challenge I set myself, but in the end, I didn't have any control over that. We actually realised, Dave and I, that we had been forgiven, that we had even been clearly accepted, because when she had her 50th birthday party, she invited us to it. It was in a club nearby, in a function room with a lovely meal and live music, and it was really fun. But for this lady, clearly, inviting me into her house was a bridge too far. But this is what we're called to do, my sisters. We are called to invite people in and to make them feel welcome, and to also be willing to go to other people's houses to enjoy their hospitality. And for some, I recognise that inviting people into your house is not actually an option. It may be too small. You may not be free to have people in your house because of who you live with. There may be health issues that make it impossible. There may be other reasons. So please don't judge others, or conversely, judge yourself, feel guilty yourself if you genuinely can't invite people into your home. There may be times and there may be seasons when God's asking you to serve him in other ways, to be hospitable in other ways. But do think creatively about what you have, about where you live, and how you can use it to welcome people into your life. We have some friends in Geelong who invited us to join them for a barbecue in the bush. They knew this amazing spot where they set up camp for the evening, cooked the meat and served the salads, and we all had a wonderful time, even looking at owls, or trying to look at owls, hearing the owls. And then we all went home to our own really comfortable beds. It was the best of both worlds. I'd never thought of doing that. This family actually knew the area really well and shared other things with us. They loved the outdoors, so they knew where to go swimming in the river, where to go kayaking. They knew great places to camp and places to walk. So that's one thing you can do, is you can know the area where you live and you can share your favourite places with others. We've really loved that the people in Officer and who are coming to our church have shared with us where you go walking, what mountains you climb, where you can find water to paddle in or whatever. And we've enjoyed that. Another time we asked another family to join us on a camping trip. I don't think they were keen at first, but I do think they enjoyed it. We went all the way to Perth together. This was going to be our last family holiday, but we were down to one child at home and we knew he wasn't going to enjoy it much by himself. So we invited this family, who still had 4 kids at home, to come with us. And we had a great time. Our youngest gets on really well with the whole family. And that we often had one of their boys riding with us in our vehicle and also sleeping in our camper, which was good. It meant our lad had a mate and they had a bit more room. A couple of times as we were driving across the Nullarbor, which is really long and boring, we had a girls' car and a boys' car, which was fun too for me because I have 3 boys. So having a girls' car was really good. So my friend didn't tow, so it needed to be our much less comfortable vehicle. But her and her 2 daughters happily joined me, and we had a lovely girly time singing and chatting without any boys around, which is a real blessing for me, having spent most of my life driving around with boys who tell me not to sing. We can also share what we have. You might be time poor, you might be really busy, but able to host a really yummy lunch with food that you can just buy at the supermarket. There's so many ready-to-eat things available now. Or time might be what you do have, and so you can spend it with people to make food. You can use your time to make food, or just be available to catch up for coffee, to help others out with kids or with gardening, with moving tasks or with housework. Share what you do have. It's such a blessing to be able to. I love it when I have eggs enough to share. I keep chooks, and I love my chooks, and I love it when they're laying really well, and I can give other people who love fresh eggs too fresh eggs. I feel so rich when I can do that. I also love sharing produce from my veggie garden. The other day I was actually out there and I decided not to go to our last community barbecue before the launch. We had 3, and by the 3rd one I was smoked, so I said, Dave, I'm not going to this one. So I was pottering around in the garden having a lovely time, and I found these peas that are a bit weird. I plant sugar snap peas, but towards the end of the season they somehow turn into normal peas. I'm not quite sure how that works. And so I don't grow normal peas deliberately, but I thought I should pick them. Such a waste if I don't. So I'm picking these normal peas and shoving them in my pockets. And then the whole launch team turns up to have a debrief after the community barbecue. And this whole launch team includes 4 under 5s or 5 and under kids. And so the first one that comes along, I just give him a pea. I go, do you know what this is, Joshy? And he opens it and eats it. And I went, oh, that was popular. And so the whole debrief that I actually joined, because I thought, well, I didn't go, so it'd be helpful to listen to what happened. I was handing the kids the peas and they were entertained the whole time, peeling them and feeding them, eating them. And one of the girls was feeding them to her little brother. So that was a lot of fun. And then afterwards I went and showed them where the peas are. So now I don't think I'll have to worry about what to do with them because the kids love them. Sharing with others is driven by our attitude to things. So they're not just there for us to use. We need to love people and to use things and not get that round the wrong way, okay? Not use people and love things, but to love people and use the things. Because whose things are they anyway? They're God's, aren't they? They're not ours. Everything we have is from God. I think that's clearer to me when I'm giving away eggs or things from my garden, because it's so much clearer that I didn't really do it. I just, look after the chooks and plant things, but God does the rest. But everything we have is from God, isn't it? Remember this, that we don't give from ourselves, from our poverty, or even from our wealth, but from the abundance lavished on us by God. This actually makes it easy to give and makes it easy to share. I'm going to leave you with that thought. We're going to stop for our break now, and the plan is, I think, just to stop for 20 minutes tonight, so I hope that's long enough for you to do whatever you need to do to get your cuppa and enjoy each other, and we'll be back in 20 minutes or so.